The bell above the cafe door rang as the man in the faded jacket entered. He looked like just another regular customer. No flashy suits or gold watches, just a man in his late 40s with a pair of sunglasses perched on his nose. He walked up to the counter, leaned casually against it, and in a voice that didn't quite match the tailored look he probably hid underneath, he ordered his drink. "Coffee. Black," he said, his words slow and deliberate, as if he were masking something beneath them. The young waitress behind the counter, Ebony, a 20-year-old with a quiet demeanor and bright eyes that had seen the harshness of life, nodded and turned to prepare his order. She'd seen all sorts of people pass through this cafe, but there was something about this man that felt off. Then, as she placed the steaming cup of coffee in front of him, she glanced up and said, almost absent-mindedly, "You don't belong here, do you?" The words hung in the air for a moment before they hit him like a slap across the face. His eyes widened, and for a split second, he froze. No one had ever said that to him before, not with that knowing look, not with that confidence. "Excuse me," he stammered, his voice cracking slightly. Ebony gave him a look that wasn't angry or judgmental, but simply true. "I said, you don't belong here," she repeated. "But you will. Just not in the way you think." Marcus, who had spent years hiding behind a facade of power and wealth, was taken aback. He had never been caught off guard like this. He spent his days manipulating situations, running from a life he didn't want to face. But now, standing in front of this young woman, his comfortable world was starting to crack. He came back the next day, the same man in the same jacket, but something had changed. This time, when he walked up to the counter, he wasn't pretending. He was a little more open, a little more aware of the way things were shifting. Ebony looked at him, almost like she was expecting him. "You're back again," she remarked as she placed his coffee on the counter. "I am," Marcus replied, his voice quieter now. "And I'm sorry." Ebony raised an eyebrow, not immediately responding. "Sorry for what?" "For assuming I knew everything about you just by looking at you," he said. "I was wrong." Ebony gave him a small nod, acknowledging his words. But she wasn't swayed. She wasn't here for his redemption arc. "You're still hiding," she said, her voice calm but cutting. "You've been running from the truth for so long. You think you can buy your way out of everything. But you can't. That's why you're here, isn't it?" Marcus didn't know how to respond. Her words hit too close to home. He looked down at his coffee, realizing that, despite all his wealth, despite everything he had accumulated, he was still empty. The days went on, and Marcus kept returning to the cafe, each visit marked by a shift in him. He was no longer just a man looking for a place to hide. He was searching for something deeper, something more meaningful. And with every passing day, Ebony seemed to see him more clearly, more truthfully than he had ever seen himself. One day, as he got up to leave, Ebony handed him a small note. "Call me when you're ready to stop hiding," she said, her voice steady. Marcus looked at the note, his fingers gripping it a little too tightly. He didn't call her that day, but when he walked out of the cafe, the weight on his shoulders was a little lighter. Something had shifted. He wasn't sure what it was, but it was there. Months passed, and Marcus didn't return to the cafe. But in that time, he sold off properties, took a break from the business world, and began to focus on things that mattered more than money, things that wealth could never buy. The shift wasn't instant. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. Then one afternoon, he walked back into the cafe. This time, he wasn't hiding anymore. He wasn't the man who had walked in with a mask. He was a man who had started to face his truth. Ebony saw him, nodded, and placed his coffee on the counter, but this time, there was no judgment. There was no knowing look. She saw him for who he truly was now. Not the millionaire who could solve her problems, but a man who had learned something about himself. "I'm ready," he said, his voice low but clear. "Ready to stop hiding." Ebony looked at him for a moment, then nodded. "Good. It's not going to be easy, but it'll be worth it." Marcus walked out of the cafe that day, his steps lighter than they had ever been before. He didn't know exactly where this new path would lead him, but he was finally on the right one. What would you do if you were in his shoes? Would you keep hiding, or would you finally face the truth?